A pair of heavy alien boots slammed into the steel floor, the echo rattling through the cavernous chamber. The hooded prisoner stumbled forward, wrists shackled, body battered, but even the dozen guards around him shifted uncomfortably when the air changed. It was like the silence itself got sharper, slicing through the false confidence thick in the room. General Vrex, towering and sneering behind rows of jagged teeth, jabbed a thick finger toward the human. "This," he bellowed to the assembly of alien commanders, "is Earth's finest? A broken thing wrapped in a cloth?" His voice boomed against the metallic walls, but a few generals exchanged uneasy glances. The prisoner hadn't moved. Hadn't flinched. Hadn't breathed wrong. The arrogance in the room was a living thing, feeding on itself, but somewhere deep beneath their cruel grins, instinct gnawed at them. Something was wrong. Something was waiting. They should have listened. Because when the voice finally came, it wasn't from the prisoner's mouth. It came from everywhere at once. Cold. Mechanical. Laughing. "Call sign Raven. Online." And in that instant, the entire base realized they hadn't captured a prisoner. They had invited a demon into their house. Vrex barked a laugh, clapping his gauntlet hands as if he found the whole thing hilarious. The other generals, armored in ornate battle suits and ceremonial robes, joined in, their laughter high-pitched and forced. It was the sort of laughter men muster when they are already trying to convince themselves the thing in front of them is still under control. Vrex swaggered forward, circling the hooded figure like a vulture sizing up a meal. "You understand nothing, little worm. Your species is a stain under our boots. You are no legend. No savior. Just another carcass." He leaned close, breath like acid rain. "Earth will fall, and you'll be here to watch it." Somewhere behind the hood, unseen, the prisoner smiled. A low thrumming started beneath the floors, barely noticeable over the general's boasting. The base's computer systems flickered, an ancient warning tone stuttering to life before disappearing again. A technician glanced up nervously, but the generals ignored it. They had waited decades for this moment. Earth's rogue agent, its most feared shadow operative, caught and collared like a stray animal. They had plans for him, interrogations, public executions, perhaps even some twisted parading of his broken body across conquered human cities. The prisoner shifted slightly, the chains rattling with a sound that didn't match the movement, like static hissing from an ancient radio. In the corner of the chamber, unnoticed, a small surveillance drone sparked, short-circuited, and dropped to the floor. General Zokra, the youngest and most impulsive of the lot, strutted forward and struck the prisoner across the head with a ceremonial staff. The blow was hard enough to kill a normal man. The prisoner barely moved. Zokra grinned at the others, basking in their approving nods. "See? Nothing left in him. Just meat in a sack." He turned to the guards. "Strip him. Let's see Earth's finest beg before the galaxy." 2 guards approached, smug and careless, gripping the prisoner's arms. One reached for the hood. His clawed hand brushed the fabric. The base plunged into darkness. A second later, emergency lights snapped on, bathing the chamber in harsh red. Doors slammed shut. Gun turrets dropped from the ceiling and began spinning wildly, confused. Across every screen, a single word flashed over and over again in a dozen languages: Raven. Sirens that had not sounded in centuries screamed to life. The guards stumbled back, weapons raised but shaking. Even the generals took a step back now, instinct finally overpowering arrogance. The prisoner's hands, still shackled, moved in a slow, almost lazy motion. The cuffs clattered to the ground, severed cleanly as if by an invisible blade. General Vrex roared, trying to reclaim control. "Kill him! Kill him now!" Dozens of plasma rifles locked onto the prisoner, beams charging. The prisoner reached up and slowly peeled back the hood. The face underneath was human. Mostly. Pale skin marred by lines of silver and black circuitry pulsing beneath the surface. Eyes that glowed with a deep, unholy blue. A grin that did not belong to a man who knew fear. His voice was quiet, conversational, as if discussing the weather. "You really should have tightened your security." Then he moved. In less than a second, he was across the room. 2 guards went down without so much as a scream, their weapons stripped from them and hurled at such velocity that the steel embedded into the far wall like bullets. Raven ducked under a barrage of plasma fire, rolling smoothly and coming up with a short sword yanked from one of the guards' belts. The blade shimmered, alien tech buzzing in protest at being turned against its makers. Raven didn't hesitate. He tore through the nearest general like a scythe through wheat. The remaining generals scrambled backward, shouting into their comms for reinforcements, evacuation, orbital strikes, anything. Outside the war room, entire wings of the base were already burning. Automated defenses activated and turned on their owners. Systems jammed. Escape pods locked down. In every security feed, Raven's face appeared, staring back at them with that same damn smile. General Zorlin, the only one with any tactical sense, realized first. This was a setup. He gasped. He wanted to be captured. Raven tilted his head, mockingly impressed. Congratulations. You're only 10 moves behind. Then he vanished into the smoke and chaos erupting around them. From above, a massive explosion tore open the chamber's roof, sending debris raining down. Through the hole, a sleek black dropship descended, its hull marked with the insignia of an Earth shadow agency so secret even Earth's own leaders denied its existence. The general's horror deepened. This wasn't just a prison break. This was an invasion. A one-man invasion. Vrex roared in fury and charged Raven directly, massive gauntlets swinging. Raven caught one swing, bones in his augmented arm cracking audibly under the strain but holding. With a grunt of effort, he twisted, using Vrex's own momentum to hurl the giant general straight into the command console. Sparks erupted. The chamber's core reactor, housed beneath the floor, began to shriek as if alive. Alarms blared. Systems failed. Entire sections of the base powered down. In the chaos, Raven stood tall in the center of the room, cloak whipping in the artificial wind generated by the failing systems. He looked every bit the myth the aliens had spent years denying. A ghost. A weapon. A reckoning. As the surviving generals scrambled for the exits, Raven tapped his wrist console. A deep, sonorous tone echoed through the station's bones. Not an alarm. A countdown. Raven watched them run, the red lights casting monstrous shadows across his face. This isn't an escape, he murmured almost sadly. It's an extinction. And then, in a voice dripping with humor and something darker, he added, Thanks for the hospitality, gentlemen. Love what you did with the place. The base trembled under his boots. And Raven walked into the fire. The emergency sirens howled through the shattered remains of Zinta Prime's command chamber, as Raven sprinted down the nearest corridor, slipping through sliding doors just before they slammed shut behind him. He moved like a ghost, no wasted energy, no unnecessary movements, every step part of a larger dance that only he seemed to know the rhythm of. The automated security systems, confused by the chaos he had unleashed, hesitated just a fraction of a second too long. In those moments, Raven mapped the base in his mind, filing away exit routes, weak points, and useful cover. The base was in lockdown mode, but that was fine. He hadn't come here to escape. He had come here to destroy everything. Behind him, a squad of heavily armored alien guards poured into the corridor, their boots thundering. Raven ducked into a maintenance shaft without missing a beat. Plasma bolts scorched the walls where he had been a second earlier. Inside the tight shaft, he moved quickly, scaling vertical ladders and slipping through service panels with the ease of someone who had long ago memorized the anatomy of enemy structures. On the other side, he dropped into an auxiliary command center where a lone technician squealed in panic at the sight of him. The technician, a wiry alien with trembling hands, scrambled to draw a small pulse pistol. Raven was on him in a blur, wrenching the weapon away and tossing it aside like trash. He pinned the terrified creature against the console with one arm. The alien whimpered in its native language, pleading for mercy. Raven spoke softly, almost kindly, his voice cutting through the terror like a knife through silk. I don't want to kill you. In fact, you're going to help me. The technician shook his head frantically, but Raven's grip tightened slightly, enough to make his meaning clear. You can either help me or die when this place burns. Your choice. The technician, after a long agonizing moment, nodded shakily. Raven let him down and pointed at the console. Override the lockdown on Sector 9. I need access to the weapons vault. The technician hesitated, eyes darting to the security feeds showing squads of soldiers converging on their position. Raven leaned closer, his tone almost amused. Tick-tock, my friend. With trembling fingers, the alien began tapping at the console, muttering under his breath. Raven stood back, alert, ready to strike if necessary. But he didn't need to. The technician worked fast, fear giving him the kind of motivation no loyalty ever could. Sector 9's doors hissed open somewhere deep in the base. Raven nodded approvingly. Good. Now jam their communications. Make them blind. The technician worked another series of commands, and across the base, the general's frantic screams over the comms turned to static. Raven patted the alien lightly on the shoulder. You're doing great. Now one last thing. Open the environmental controls in the command sector. Let's give our friends a little surprise. The technician paused, eyes wide with horror. Opening the environmental controls would flood the chambers with the unfiltered atmosphere from the planet's surface, methane-heavy, acidic, and entirely incompatible with most of the species currently occupying the base. The technician gulped and obeyed. As the system confirmed the release, Raven smiled and spoke without looking back. You might want to find a gas mask. He was gone before the alien could respond, melting into the shadows as klaxons changed pitch to a shrieking, desperate wail. General Zorlin stumbled through the smoke-filled corridors, barking orders that no one could hear and shooting suspicious glances over his shoulder every few seconds. He hated admitting fear, but something about that prisoner terrified him in ways no enemy ever had. Zorlin knew warriors, knew how they fought, how they thought. But this was something else. Something born from calculated rage and sharpened by endless war. Something designed not to survive, but to win at any cost. At an intersection, he collided with General Vrex, who looked more furious than frightened, though his blood-smeared armor told a different story. Vrex shoved Zorlin aside roughly. Fall back to the command nexus. We regroup there. Zorlin opened his mouth to argue but snapped it shut when the lights flickered again and an ominous creaking noise echoed down the hallway. They sprinted toward the nexus, a fortified hub meant to withstand even orbital bombardment. But when they burst through the heavy doors, they found nothing but darkness, and a single figure waiting for them, perched casually atop the central command table. Raven. Vrex roared and charged, weapon raised, but Raven calmly kicked over the table, using it as a shield. Plasma blasts ricocheted wildly, one grazing Zorlin's arm and sending him spinning into a control panel. Raven rolled under Vrex's clumsy swing, came up behind him, and drove a stolen alien blade deep between the armor plates at the general's spine. Vrex howled in agony, swinging blindly, but Raven already moved away, cutting through the remaining guards with merciless efficiency. Zorlin, clutching his wounded arm, tried to crawl toward a hidden emergency console that would trigger the base's self-destruct. If he couldn't kill Raven, he would deny him victory. His fingers brushed the activation switch. A boot pinned his hand to the floor. Zorlin looked up into Raven's glowing eyes and felt true despair for the first time. Raven shook his head slowly, almost pityingly. Nice try. Then he smashed the console underfoot, sparks showering the air. But I have other plans. With brutal efficiency, Raven activated a data drive at his wrist, uploading a virus into the Nexus core. All across the base, systems began eating themselves, software rewriting and folding in on its own code like a digital black hole. Raven's virus was not just sabotage, it was genocide for data. Every military secret, every weapon schematic, every troop movement plan the generals had stored was now his. Earth wouldn't just win the war. It would end it before it truly began. Zorlin lay there, gasping, watching helplessly as everything they had built crumbled. Raven crouched beside him, resting his forearms on his knees in a mockery of casual conversation. You're wondering why, right? Why go through all this trouble? Why not just nuke the place from orbit? Zorlin nodded weakly. Raven smiled, and for a moment there was something almost human in his expression, almost. Because, he said softly, some lessons have to be learned the hard way. In the distance, explosions rocked the base as the environmental flood reached critical systems. Fire and acidic gas filled the corridors. Through it all, Raven stood, untouched, unbroken, a monument to humanity's vengeance. He tapped his wrist console again, signaling his extraction team, who, judging by the roaring engines overhead, were right on schedule. He turned his back on Zorlin without another word, striding toward the rendezvous point. Behind him, Zorlin coughed violently, the air already burning his lungs, the base collapsing around him. His final thought before unconsciousness took him was not of glory or battle songs, but of a hooded figure, and a name that would haunt the dreams of every surviving general for the rest of their short, miserable lives. Raven. The dark bird of death, now flying free. The corridors of Zinta Prime twisted ahead of Raven like veins of a dying creature, pulsing with the last gasps of a collapsing system. Smoke poured from the vents, obscuring the flashing warning lights, and the heavy stink of burning machinery filled the air. Raven moved swiftly, not wasting a second, his senses tuned to every flicker of movement. He was nearing the exit to the upper hangar where his extraction team would land, but something gnawed at the back of his mind. He knew generals like Frex too well. They were cowards, yes, but desperate cowards were dangerous. They wouldn't simply run. They would set traps and pray their enemy was arrogant enough to stumble in. As he turned a sharp corner, a sudden click beneath his boot froze him mid-step. Without hesitation, he shifted his weight backward just as the floor plate beneath him exploded upward, revealing a gaping mechanical maw. A pit trap, rigged for instant death. Even as shrapnel whizzed past his face, Raven pivoted off the wall and rolled across the floor, escaping by inches. From the smoke ahead, a figure emerged, clapping slowly, the sound oddly hollow in the scorched corridor. It was General Zokra, his once pristine uniform now torn and stained, his face twisted in gleeful malice. "Not bad, human," Zokra sneered, twirling a slender, hooked blade in one hand. "But you won't dodge everything. You can't." Raven straightened, brushing soot from his shoulders with exaggerated care. "If I had a credit for every time some overconfident alien said that, I could buy your planet and turn it into a parking lot." Zokra hissed and lunged forward, the blade flashing toward Raven's throat. Raven sidestepped easily, grabbed the general's wrist, and twisted sharply, eliciting a satisfying crack and a howl of pain. He disarmed Zokra, flipped the general over his hip, and sent him crashing through a cracked bulkhead. Before Raven could finish him off, a new threat stepped into view. A figure wrapped in flowing cloaks of refracted light, barely visible against the smoke and fire. Raven stiffened. He knew the legends. The cloaked assassins were the elite killers of the galaxy, trained to murder without warning or mercy. If the generals had called one of them in, it meant they were truly desperate. The assassin wasted no time on threats or ceremony. A pair of monomolecular daggers sliced toward Raven, the edges so sharp they hissed through the air. For the first time since escaping, Raven found himself on the defensive. The assassin's movements were nearly impossible to predict, flickering like a broken hologram from one position to another. Raven ducked, blocked, countered, barely keeping pace. A feint caught him in the ribs, the dagger slicing through his armor to the flesh beneath. Pain blossomed, sharp and immediate, but Raven pushed it aside. Pain was nothing new. Pain was an old friend. He feigned a stumble, luring the assassin in for a killing blow, then struck upward with a hidden blade from his wrist. The assassin dodged, but the movement was slower, more deliberate now. Raven noticed the hesitation and pressed his advantage. As he fought, he spoke in low tones, words meant for the assassin's ears alone. "You're fighting for traitors. Cowards. They won't honor your contract. They'll kill you to cover their failure." The assassin's strikes faltered, just for a heartbeat, but enough. Raven drove forward, blade locked with dagger, faces inches apart. "Work with me. Live." Stay loyal to them, and die forgotten. For a long second, the assassin's masked face remained unreadable. Then, with a sharp motion, the assassin disengaged and leapt back, lowering their weapons slightly. Without a word, the cloaked figure turned and dispatched 2 approaching alien guards with casual efficiency. Raven chuckled, a short bark of laughter despite the burning wound at his side. Welcome to the winning team. Together, they cut a path through the remaining defenders. As they moved, Raven noticed something curious. Many of the alien soldiers weren't fighting to win anymore. They were running. Not from him, but from each other. General Vrex's forces clashed with General Zorlin's loyalists, shouting accusations of betrayal even as Raven carved through them. It seemed the pressure of defeat was revealing the fractures that had always been there. Alliances of convenience crumbling under the weight of self-preservation. Raven almost felt sorry for them. Almost. They reached the blast doors to the hangar just as the floor shuddered beneath them, another explosion tearing through the lower levels. Raven's wrist console buzzed with an incoming transmission. A gravelly voice, familiar and welcome, crackled through the static. This is Nightshade. 2 minutes out. Extraction window closing fast. Raven tapped a quick confirmation and glanced at the assassin, who stood silently beside him, daggers dripping with alien blood. We have 2 minutes to clear a path. Think you can keep up? The assassin tilted their head slightly, an unmistakable gesture of amusement. The hangar doors began to grind open, but not from Raven's hacking. Someone was coming through from the other side. A squad of heavy infantry, hulking brutes in powered exocets, stomped into view, weapons bristling. Leading them was General Vrex himself, one arm dangling uselessly at his side, his face a mask of hatred. You die here, Raven! He bellowed, voice echoing off the hangar's metal walls. There will be no escape! Raven sighed, flexing his fingers. He was exhausted, bleeding, and his systems were running at dangerous overload levels. But giving up had never been an option. He cracked his neck and gave Rex a lazy smile. Funny, he said. I was about to say the same thing. The battle that followed was savage. The heavy infantry opened fire, plasma bolts turning the hangar into a storm of energy and death. Raven moved like water, flowing between cover points, using the chaos against his enemies. The assassin blurred alongside him, a deadly wraith in the smoke. Together they dismantled the squad, one by one, until only Vrex remained, wounded but still burning with fury. Vrex charged, swinging a massive warhammer designed to crush tanks. Raven barely dodged the first blow, the second, but the third caught him across the shoulder, sending him sprawling. The general loomed over him, raising the hammer for the killing strike. And then the assassin struck. A single, perfect throw. A dagger buried itself deep in Vrex's exposed neck joint. The giant staggered, bellowing in rage and agony. Raven surged up, seized the warhammer with both hands, and drove it into Vrex's chest with every ounce of strength he had left. The armor crumpled. Bones snapped. Vrex collapsed, dead before he hit the ground. Raven staggered back, breathing heavily as Nightshade's dropship roared into the hangar, its doors already open. Soldiers in sleek black armor provided covering fire, clearing the last remnants of alien resistance. Raven and the assassin sprinted toward the ship, leaping aboard just as the dropship began to lift off. As they soared away from the burning base, Raven leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes for a moment. He had done it. Not just escaped, but humiliated the generals, fractured their alliances, and stolen the lifeblood of their empire. But he knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. There were bigger battles ahead, and darker enemies still hiding in the shadows. The dropship rumbled through the atmosphere of Zinta Prime, battered by explosions below and shrapnel still soaring through the sky. Inside, Raven sat on the cold steel floor, quietly patching up the worst of his wounds. His newly acquired ally, the cloaked assassin, remained silent, occasionally glancing out of the small side window at the devastation below. Neither spoke, not because they lacked things to say, but because the weight of unfinished business pressed down harder than any injury. Raven knew General Vrex's death was a blow, but there were still pieces on the board, still enemies clawing for survival. And survival made desperate creatures even more dangerous. The comms unit crackled and Nightshade's voice came through, sharp and urgent. Extraction protocol compromised. We have enemy vessels inbound. Ground defenses active. Immediate reroute advised. Raven wiped blood from his mouth with the back of his glove and tapped his console to bring up a tactical display. Enemy ships, a ragtag fleet pulled together in chaos, swarmed the upper atmosphere, trying to seal off escape routes. Among them, Raven spotted a distinctive ship marked with the insignia of General Zorlan. The coward had survived and was now rallying what little forces he could muster in a last, pathetic attempt to kill the unkillable. Nightshade's dropship shuddered violently as the first wave of enemy fire found them. Pilots barked orders and adjusted course, but the situation was rapidly deteriorating. They wouldn't make it to orbit at this rate. Raven stood and moved toward the cockpit, scanning the sensor feed. A hidden ground-based cannon battery was locking onto them, preparing to fire a blast powerful enough to vaporize the ship in one shot. Raven cursed under his breath. They needed to disable that battery, or they were dead in the sky. He turned to the assassin, who gave a small nod, already understanding. Without wasting time, Raven pulled up a holographic map of the nearby terrain. There was an old maintenance corridor leading to the battery's understructure, barely wide enough for a team to slip through unnoticed. It was a fool's path, a death trap if caught, but Raven knew there was no choice. They jumped before the ship could fully land, rolling through the thick acidic dust and sprinting for cover. Behind them, Nightshade's dropship peeled away, drawing enemy fire and buying them precious minutes. Raven and the assassin moved swiftly across the scorched earth, weaving between craters and the blackened skeletons of dead war machines. Explosions lit the sky, painting the scene in eerie flashes of blue and red. Reaching the entrance of the maintenance tunnel, they found it guarded by 2 alien soldiers, each armed and alert despite the surrounding chaos. Raven exchanged a look with the assassin. No words needed. They split apart, flanking the guards. Raven moved like a shadow, low and fast. The first guard barely registered his presence before Raven drove a knife into the gap of its armor, silencing it instantly. The second guard whirled at the sudden movement but found itself face to face with the assassin's dagger a second later. They dragged the bodies into the rubble, slipped into the tunnel, and plunged into darkness. The maintenance shaft stank of rust and decay, with pipes hissing sporadically from cracked seams. Raven led the way, navigating by memory and instinct, trusting the assassin to cover their rear. Time was bleeding away faster than he liked. They emerged inside the battery's lower systems, a cavernous space filled with humming machinery and exposed conduits. Above them, the massive cannon rotated, tracking Nightshade's ship like a predator savoring its prey. Raven scanned for weak points. Direct assault would be suicide. They needed to disable the power core that fed the weapon. It was buried beneath layers of shielding, but Raven spotted a maintenance ladder leading into the depths of the facility. Motioning to the assassin, they made their way down, passing banks of energy converters and coolant tanks. Halfway to the core, alarms blared. Automated turrets emerged from the walls, targeting them instantly. Raven swore and ducked behind a column as the assassin activated a small device that bent light around them, rendering their form nearly invisible. Raven fired calculated shots, destroying turret after turret with precise blasts, but the number overwhelmed him quickly. Thinking fast, he spotted an overhead conduit carrying volatile plasma. He fired a single shot at the pipe, rupturing it, and sending a stream of burning gas into the corridor. The turrets, lacking any concept of self-preservation, continued firing until they overheated and exploded one by one. Pressing forward through the inferno, Raven and the assassin reached the core. It pulsed with raw energy, protected by a thick transparent shell. Setting charges would take too long. Raven needed another way. He noticed the coolant system was jury-rigged, likely rushed into place during the base's frantic final upgrades. Sabotaging it could cause the core to overheat and implode without a direct hit. He turned to the assassin. "Cover me." The assassin nodded and melted into the shadows while Raven set to work, fingers moving expertly over ancient wiring and alien control panels. Up above, General Zorlan barked desperate orders to his fleet, unaware of the dooms sneaking toward him from below. Raven stripped insulation from wires, reversed coolant flow, and overloaded the containment fields. The core began to whine ominously, the sound rising in pitch with every second. As he completed the final circuit, he heard boots pounding toward them. Reinforcements. Dozens of them. Too many to fight head-on. He turned to the assassin. No retreat. We go through. The assassin responded with a simple gesture, flipping a throwing knife expertly into a ready grip. They met the enemy at the mouth of the maintenance shaft, a storm of plasma bolts and war cries. Raven fought with ruthless precision, weaving between shots, striking down enemies with clinical efficiency. The assassin was pure poetry in motion, blades flashing through the smoke and confusion. Still, the weight of numbers pressed hard. They would be overwhelmed soon. Raven triggered the detonator on his wrist just as a massive alien bruiser lunged at him. The explosion from the sabotaged core ripped through the battery, a shockwave flattening everything in its path. Raven and the assassin were hurled backward, battered and bruised but alive. Above, the cannon battery shattered, its final targeting system melting into slag. Nightshade's dropship, now free of imminent death, swooped low and unleashed a barrage of missiles at the remaining enemy fleet. Ships spiraled out of control, fireballs blooming against the twilight sky. Raven climbed to his feet, spitting blood and grinning savagely. As the assassin pulled him to his feet, he saw something unexpected. Across the battlefield, figures were rising from the ruins, not enemy soldiers, but slaves, prisoners, and oppressed civilians. They had seen what Raven had done, seen him tear down their oppressors with nothing but defiance and steel. And now they rose, picking up discarded weapons, forming a ragtag army of the furious and the free. The sky above Zinta Prime cracked open like an old scar torn fresh, spilling fire and steel. Raven stood at the center of it all, boots planted firmly in the scorched earth, watching the chaos unfold with an unsettling calm. Around him, the makeshift army of former slaves, prisoners, and defectors surged like a tide, overrunning the last pockets of alien resistance. Smoke twisted in black pillars toward the heavens, and the ground shook as debris rained down from the shattered fleet above. Raven wiped grime and blood from his face with the back of his hand, eyes narrowing as his wrist console beeped an urgent alert. Something massive was breaching the atmosphere, something far larger than the battered remnants of Zorlan's forces. Nightshade's voice buzzed through his earpiece, clipped and tense. New contact inbound. Massive energy readings. Origin unknown. Brace yourself, Raven. This isn't part of the plan. Raven didn't respond. He simply watched as the clouds above churned and split apart under the pressure of something colossal descending from orbit. What emerged was not a ship, not exactly. It was a fortress, a relic of an ancient war the galaxy had long tried to forget. A mobile siege citadel, a weapon of last resort. And someone, in their desperation or insanity, had unleashed it. General Zorlan had not fled as Raven assumed. No, he had gone to the last dark corner of their arsenal and awoken a nightmare. The siege citadel hung in the sky, casting a shadow that swallowed armies whole, its hull bristling with weapons old enough to have forgotten their own purpose. Energy fields rippled across its surface, and at its heart, something even darker stirred, a weapon that had erased civilizations long before humanity even dreamed of the stars. Raven let out a breath, low and measured, forcing calm into his veins. He turned to the assassin at his side, who for the first time showed hesitation. This wasn't a battle they could win with blades and courage. This was something else entirely. Raven tapped a few commands into his wrist console, opening a secure line to Nightshade's ship. Prepare all available ordnance. Focus on weak points in the energy lattice. We hit it hard, fast, and pray it's as old and brittle as it looks. Nightshade's response was grim. Copy that. No promises. Raven closed the channel and turned to his gathered forces. They were battered, exhausted, many of them barely standing. But in their eyes he saw something that no weapon could destroy. They had already tasted victory. They would not go quietly. He climbed onto a piece of fallen wreckage and raised his voice over the howling wind. That thing up there, it's not here to conquer. It's here to wipe us out. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't take prisoners. It destroys everything. He let the words hang, the truth heavy and brutal. But we are not afraid. We've broken their chains. We've shattered their armies. And now, we break their last weapon. With a roar, the army surged, fueled by a desperate, furious hope that turned fear into fire. The first volley from the citadel turned half the battlefield into molten slag, carving deep scars into the earth. Raven's people scattered, regrouped, struck back. Nightshade's dropship and the few surviving air units began strafing runs, targeting exposed nodes and gun emplacements. It was like trying to punch holes in a mountain, but slowly, piece by piece, they began to make cracks. Raven fought his way through the chaos, leading a strike team toward the central core. If they could breach the outer hull, plant charges, and detonate from the inside, they might bring it down before it could unleash its final weapon. The assassin moved beside him, silent and deadly, cutting a path through enemy automatons pouring from the citadel's lower bays. Each step closer was a battle. Each moment, the sky grew darker as the citadel's systems powered up fully. Raven pushed forward, ignoring the growing exhaustion, the pain lacing every movement. There was only the mission. Only the finish line. A massive blast knocked him off his feet, and he landed hard against the crumbling wall. His vision blurred, the taste of blood sharp in his mouth. When he forced himself to rise, he found the assassin covering him, blades flashing with desperate speed against overwhelming odds. He dragged himself up, signaling the remaining strike team to push forward. They reached a service hatch on the citadel's outer skin, a forgotten access point from a bygone era. Raven tore it open with brute force and climbed inside, the assassin following without hesitation. The interior of the citadel was worse than the outside. Ancient, rusted, yet still pulsing with malevolent energy. The walls seemed to breathe, alive with circuitry too alien for comfort. They raced through twisting corridors, dodging defense systems and environmental hazards, every step taking them closer to the core. Finally, they reached it. A vast chamber, its heart dominated by a swirling vortex of dark energy contained within a fragile lattice of cracked crystal and broken metal. It thrummed with a pulse that was almost a voice, whispering promises of oblivion. Raven wasted no time. He set the charges around the core, calibrating them carefully. There would be no second chance. As he armed the final explosive, the citadel itself seemed to react. Automated defenses sprung to life. Walls shifted, forming barriers. From the shadows, a figure emerged. It was not Zorlin, but something wearing his face, twisted and distorted. His body merged with alien machinery, his eyes glowing with a sickly light. He had bonded with the citadel, sacrificing his last shred of humanity for a chance at revenge. Raven faced him, weapon ready, but Zorlin only laughed, a hollow, broken sound. "You think you've won, Raven? You're just delaying the inevitable. We are the future. You are the past." Raven stared at him, unblinking. "No. I'm the reminder." Then he opened fire. The battle was brutal and short. Zorlin's new form was powerful but unstable, his mind fragmented. Raven exploited every weakness, every hesitation. In the end, he drove a blade straight through Zorlin's chest, severing whatever twisted connection he had forged with the citadel. The creature shrieked and collapsed, and the core's containment began to fail. Raven grabbed the assassin and sprinted for the hatch, the walls crumbling around them. They barely made it out before the charges detonated. The explosion tore through the citadel with apocalyptic fury, breaking its spine, ripping it apart from within. Pieces of the fortress rained down across the battlefield, smashing into the ground with earth-shattering force. Raven and the assassin tumbled through the dust and debris, coughing and battered, but alive. Around them, the remnants of the army cheered, their cries echoing into the ruined sky. Nightshade's dropship swooped low, picking them up. Inside, Raven slumped into a seat, finally allowing himself a moment to breathe. He watched as the last pieces of the citadel crashed into the earth, the final monument to their enemies crumbling into dust. He tapped into his console, sending a single transmission back to Earth. Mission successful. Resistance growing. Situation volatile. Awaiting further orders. As he closed the channel, he noticed the assassins sitting quietly across from him, cleaning their blades with a serene focus. He chuckled under his breath. You know, he said, for a galaxy full of death machines and psychotic generals, today wasn't half bad. The assassin gave a small, almost imperceptible nod,